old school Jerry Lewis, old school. And you're all sitting there going, that was supposed to be funny? And Miss Julie's over there dying. If somebody says, he's a 98-pound weakling, what do they mean? Briar?
That would be like a heavy weight that you're used to. If you give him a heavy weight that you're used to lifting, and you think or you know that he's not going to be able to give it, he's not going to be able to hold it, and give it to him, he's just going to drop it.
Okay, so he's not as strong as you are, that he's going to, something that you could do easily, maybe that person's not going to be able to do that thing, right? Okay, what else? What else do you think it might mean? Might mean anything else? Go ahead.
Like he's small and weak.
Small and weak. He's small and he's weak. 98 pounds. Except for 2 or 3 in this room, I imagine the rest of us easily surpass that 98-pound mark.
Just over it.
Just a little bit. Is that much? Right?
Just a
Oh
smidgen.
yeah, you maybe. You maybe. But me and Anthony, we're closer to like 125, right?
Maybe a little lower.
Yeah, so if someone says, he's a 98-pound weakling, what do they mean? Is there anything else they might be inferring about that person besides that they're small and weak, or that they can't lift up weight? Is there anything else you think they might mean about that person? Anyone? 98-pound weakling.
Maybe doesn't have mental strength or something,
Perhaps not the mental strength.
overwhelmed easier, something like that.
Person could be overwhelmed easily. I think those things could be true about that statement sometimes. Anyone else have any thoughts? 98-pound weakling. So we've already kind of started heading in that direction. So other than physical weakness, what are different ways that a person can be weak? Give me some good examples there. Other than physical weakness, what are other ways that a person can be weak?
A bull against a bunch of people that are pretty mentally weak.
Say that again.
So I'd pull a bit against a bunch of people that are pretty weak.
You mean
Can't
weak?
handle the pressure.
Can't handle the pressure. So when they're under pressure, they are weak and can't handle the pressure. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay, so they are too intimidated by Sam because of his superiority.
Oh, really?
Okay.
Complex.
Someone else? Can you think of another example how people might be weak other than physical weakness? So Sam implies that people might feel intimidated by another person and be weak under that intimidation.
You can't be intimidated by a person, you just can't handle any type of, stuff starts to go down.
So when pressure mounts, they buckle under the pressure, so they're weak under pressure. Okay? Can you think of anything else?
Or like people that a very minor inconvenience happens or something like that, they start like crying.
So maybe
They get hurt, their feelings get hurt easily.
feelings can be hurt easily, or a minor disruption to their life can mean utter disaster for them, so they don't handle those things well. So those are some ways that a person can be weak. That's true. Can you think of anything else? What about someone who's been trying to follow a diet and then their favorite dessert maybe passes their way? What do you think? Can there maybe be some weakness to fold to that and maybe eat something that you really shouldn't be eating.
Mhm.
Every day.
Yeah, every day of my life. Yeah, that's happened a little bit for me during the COVID time, guys. I hate to say it, I put on a couple pounds. Or 2 or 5 or 10. Can you think of any other way a person might be weak? Can you think of any other ways that a person might be weak?
I think sometimes integrity,
Integrity.
they are very weak when it comes to having any kind of credibility to themselves.
Okay.
And spiritually, I think there's some weakness that some people either don't have it at all, they have no relationship, or they don't have any knowledge of religion, they don't acknowledge God at all, versus people that are very caught up in believing in God. And then you have another level where there's a full straight ticket, they are without a doubt compadres with God.
Kind of like me.
Yeah, we absolutely do things. You and Jesus are like best buddies.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So maybe you're talking about spiritual weakness. I like the word integrity there because you know what to do, right? You know what the right thing is to do, what the wrong thing is to do. And maybe those rules are great for everyone else, but if it's what you want, no big deal. I'm gonna go ahead and do it anyway. Or maybe you just buckle under the pressure and you do the wrong thing, even though you know to do the right thing. All of those, and I think, guys, if we could go on probably for hours about different ways of being weak and weakness, because all of us have our own different weaknesses, things that tempt us or things that we won't find ourselves very strong in. So there's all kinds of different ways to be weak. My next question to you is, what is something that makes you feel weak or powerless? What is something that makes you feel weak or powerless? It's probably something that intimidates you sometimes. Maybe you feel intimidated by it. Hannah?
Okay, so like I play golf, of course. So like the other girls, they're so much like bigger than me, and they can hit the ball farther than me. So then it makes me feel weak when I can't like hit my ball as far as them.
Ah, there you go. So you see how far they hit the ball, and but you don't, so it makes you feel weak in
Yeah,
comparison.
like I can still hit it like good to my ability, but it's not like their best ability.
And that's and I like that you said that because it means you're comparing you against them, and it actually might not really be a very good comparison to make, right? Sometimes you look at yourself and you compare yourself against someone else, and sometimes it just isn't fair to compare yourself against someone else. You're not being, I suppose, just to yourself when you do that sometimes. Brian, and speak up loud, buddy. I can't hear you through your mask.
I was gonna say, like, people being, because I have friends, like a lot of my friends go and they play sports.
Yeah.
And it like, because I can't play sports, I'm just like, hearing all them talking about sports, I'm like, what am I supposed to do? Bring up something else?
Yeah. Yeah, so that's completely understandable. So your friends are able to play sports, but you clearly, you're not able to do that. And so that can be an intimidation. That can make you feel weak in a lot of different ways. Completely. Anyone else? Something that makes you feel weak? Anyone? You never feel weak about anything, do you? You never feel intimidated or embarrassed or...
I kind of on the same page. Whenever I don't go as much as I used to. I would like to, but whenever I go to the gym and see all these like big guys, I could lift a bunch of weights, and I wasn't like I could lift a lot, but not anywhere near as like even my friends can do way more than me. And I just feel like I'm not as good as them because I can't do as much as they are. I'm not on their level.
You're not on the same level that they're on. So yeah, so when you see how much they're able to do, but you're not able to do that, you feel weak, you feel intimidated, maybe a little embarrassed, maybe even, yeah. There's all kinds of different things that can make us feel weak or embarrassed. Maybe you would like to be able to cook well, but you don't, you know you can't, and you've been trying, and so you bring something to the table, so to speak, but it's like at a family meal or a family gathering, and you know, Aunt Sue brought hers and you brought yours, and yours looks really, really pitiful next to Aunt Sue's. So you feel kind of embarrassed because there's all kinds of different ways that we can feel weak. It doesn't matter what it is, whether it's a spiritual weakness or whether it's a physical weakness, it doesn't matter. Those things can intimidate us, they can make you feel weak. If you know that you're weak about something in some way, how does it make you feel about yourself? When you know that you're weak or feel that you're weak in some area, how does it make you feel about you?
It makes me feel that I'm not as good as them,
Feel
or
like
like
you
other people.
feel like you're not as good as they are. Definitely can affect what I'm looking for.
Self-esteem.
Your self-esteem. Couldn't get it out of my mouth. Thank you. It can affect your self-esteem. Someone else. How does it make you feel about yourself when you know that you are weak in an area?
That kind of makes you feel not good enough and almost like angry and disappointed.
Not
Maybe
good
in
enough.
yourself.
Disappointed in yourself. A little bit angry at yourself.
I think I kind of get weak and I get down low a little bit, and then there's just something inside of me that kicks in. And I get very defensive as far as like, I can conquer this.
So,
I can beat this.
so that weakness sometimes can make you feel defensive. Or you can get your dander up enough to maybe push further maybe sometimes, okay? How does weakness lead to failure?
Don't keep trying.
Say that again?
If you don't keep trying.
If you don't keep trying, so you feel weak, you get defeated by the weakness, and you decide, that's it, I'm done. And you just give up. It's good point, Amber. Thank you. That's excellent. How can weakness lead to failure?
Or like, in my situation, like I said at the gym, if you like, you do too much 'cause you're trying to be on someone's level, but you're like not there yet, but you're trying to do it, then you end up failing because you're not there yet. You're trying to overdo it, like push it.
So you've pushed yourself maybe too hard
Yeah.
rather than pacing yourself
Yeah.
in a more reasonable way. So you think, I gotta do it now, so you push harder than really you should have, and that leads to failure rather than being reasonable with yourself, knowing I gotta take this a step at a time and be willing to make the journey like they made the journey. Okay, so that's a good point too.
Okay, so like for sports teams, they have tryouts, and then like many people can try out, but only like the best are kept on the team. So like if you aren't as good as other people and you aren't kept on the team, like that can make you feel defeated, and then failure. You could feel like you're not great.
So you give up, kind of like Amber said, right?
Yeah.
And you stop even trying throughout the year to prepare for the next year to try again, right? Yeah. Definitely. Those are all of those are really great points. A weakness can lead to failure in all kinds of ways. One of the things we haven't mentioned yet is, I think sometimes we know we're weak in an area, so we just on purpose neglect it. And we stay and we remain weak. And because we decide that we want to do anything with that weak there, we fail because it always comes back around to us. And it's sort of like, it's not exactly giving up, but you kind of embrace your weakness. You see what I'm saying? And you go, I'm just going to live with it, I'm going to embrace it, I'm just going to go on. And so that weakness continues to haunt you because you don't choose to go any further with it. I want to look at 3 failures that happened over the course of Holy Week. And I want to ask you the same 3 questions for each one of these incidents. And the incidents all should be pretty familiar, but I think that these can be, to remember what they are and to take this kind of look at them, I think they can be helpful both in remembering what happened and what Christ faced through the week, but I also think that they can be helpful for us when we consider what our own weakness can lead to and maybe the consequences they can wind up having. Our first passage I want to look at is from Matthew chapter 26, verses 14 through 16. And again, familiar passage. It just says, "Then Judas Iscariot, one of the 12 disciples, went to the leading priests and asked, 'How much will you pay me to betray Jesus to you?' And they gave him 30 pieces of silver. From that time on, Judas began looking for an opportunity to betray Jesus." So, in what ways do you think that Judas was weak in this situation? Now, try to take into account not just this passage itself, but some other things maybe you already know about Judas's activity. Go ahead, Anna.
Instead of staying close to Jesus, he was gonna just like give him up and kind of show the like soldiers where he was.
Okay, so his weakness was that rather than drawing close to Jesus,
Yeah.
trusting him, he decided that he would give him up.
Mm-hmm.
He was kind of weak if he cared more about, like payment and stuff like that than being close to Jesus.
So maybe the motivation of payment was more important to him than doing the right thing. Anyone else?
I would say he used his position to gain power. So he was a disciple already, but he used that discipleship in order to gain even more power.
Okay, so he used his position to his advantage.
Mhm.
Okay, he used his position to his own advantage rather than to do the right thing, or what he thought was his advantage.
Mhm.
Anyone else? Can you think of any other ways that Judas was weak in this? If you consider maybe sometimes the why of Judas's motive here, why did he do this? What was it that motivated him? Maybe it was money, right? Some people think that the money wasn't maybe necessarily a part of it. Some people think that Judas believed that Jesus was the Messiah, just not in the same way that Jesus was going to be the Messiah. But they thought that maybe Judas was trying to force Jesus' hand to become this strong military type Messiah that would lead Judea against Rome. And so he thought this might have been a way to force Jesus into doing what he wanted, which would have been kind of what Miss Julie was saying, using his position to his own advantage, or to force Jesus in what he was doing. He was more interested, regardless of what exactly was the motive, whether it was money, whether it was increasing his power, whatever it was, it all comes down to one thing. He was more interested in himself and what he wanted than what Jesus wanted, right? I guess I kind of already answered my own question here, sorry. Went too far. The next question was supposed to be, what was his greatest failure? So what was his greatest failure?
Well, I think though, isn't it like all of us, where we as humans have a tendency to try to outwit or outthink God? Because we think that we know better than God what the solution is. So instead of waiting for God to move, we move God to what we think and where we are wanting to go, or what we want. So that's another sign of weakness. It's human weakness.
Anyone else want to comment on that? What do you think was Judas's greatest failure? Anyone? Again, I think it all comes down to, no matter whether it was money or what, no matter what it was, that he was more interested in what he wanted than what Jesus wanted. Do you think, now remember, what did all this lead to? When Judas did this, what did it lead to? Dumb question. Who's? Jesus' death.
Well,
right?
and to his as well.
Well, and it led to, that's right, it did lead to his own death too, didn't it? By his do you think Judas could have been forgiven, and why? Do you think Judas could have been forgiven, and why? And this is a hard one to kind of ask, sort of, or to kind of answer. Go ahead, Hannah.
Well, I think so, because, well, if he truly, like, wanted forgiveness and wanted to be, like, a better person, because, like, you see on the cross, like, the other person next to Jesus' side,
Yep.
he asked for forgiveness, and then he was able to go to heaven on the cross.
On the cross, that's right. And he obviously had been a pretty bad guy, because
Yeah,
even,
because-
the Bible even identifies him as a thief, doesn't he? No, that's true. So you think Judas could
Yeah,
have been forgiven
if he wanted to be.
If
Like,
he wanted.
truly, yeah.
if he wanted to be? Anyone else? What do you think? Do you think Judas could have been forgiven? Miss Sarah's hand keeps going up and down and up and down and up and down. You want us to comment any on that, Miss Sarah?
Well, Peter did essentially the same thing.
Ah,
He betrayed Jesus, like, not for necessarily money, but he did the same thing. He denied the authority of Jesus or whatever, but he repented. And so, I think,
you're getting a little ahead of it, but you're right. You're absolutely
Well,
correct.
I think too, I mean, the fact that he did take his own life, I think that's always a questionable, what was his intent? His intent maybe wasn't to betray Jesus in the way that it turned out. His intent was possibly what you said, to cause Jesus to show his power,
Thought Jesus would
And
step
so
up and
when
show-
you then realize that what you've done is actually worse than what your intentions were, there's an even more devastating effect on your,
So you do something, and then the results end up being way worse than you ever could have imagined. You never felt in that way, I'm sure. You've never had something happen where you screwed up, and then the end result was way more horrible, way more bigger than you could even have believed it could have been. That never happens to any of us. Yeah, that's a good point, Miss Julie. Good point. Let's go on to the next passage. I really like this translation of this next passage. I'm going to admit straight up, the end part of it sounds a little funny, but I think it's not just a little funny. It shows us something kind of profound. Jesus asked them, in Mark chapter 14, 48 through 52, Jesus asked them, "Am I some dangerous revolutionary that you come with swords and clubs to arrest me? Why don't you arrest me in the temple? I was there among you teaching every day, but these things are happening to fulfill what the scripture says about me." Then all the disciples deserted him and ran away. One young man, following behind, was clothed only in a long linen shirt. Then the mob tried to grab him. He slipped out of his shirt and ran away naked. Now that seems kind of funny that whoever this guy was, or kid was, or whomever, was just in his shirt, and he slipped out and runs off buck naked the other direction. That seems kind of funny, but to me it speaks all kinds of volumes in the direction that's not funny. And maybe we can get there here in a moment. In what ways do you think the disciples, because it wasn't one disciple, right? It says, let's go back a page, then all his disciples deserted him. All of them. Now, here's the deal. There's a good possibility it wasn't just the 11 remaining disciples besides Judas that were in the garden. There may have been a group of followers other than just his 12 closest with him. So think about that for a second, okay? Okay, and then of course, then it gets down to the point where they even try to catch this one guy, and he struggles out of his shirt and runs off naked. In what ways do you think the disciples were weak?
Well, they ran away instead of, like, staying staying with Jesus, they just left him alone.
Instead of being or staying with Jesus, or accompanying them or following the guards, they all scattered and
They
ran.
deserted.
They deserted him. Go ahead, Brian.
They chickened out and left.
They chickened out. Now, so Hannah says they deserted him. I like your description really well, Brian, because you talk about, when you say someone's chicken, what do you mean?
Like, they're scared.
They're scared. They were afraid, weren't they? So they let their fear make them run, didn't they? So there's weakness there because they let their fear control their decision, didn't they? So that's an excellent observation, Brian. In what other ways do you think that the disciples might have been weak? Tegan?
Their faith was weak.
What?
Their faith was weak.
Their faith was weak. And we know what Jesus had said to them, right? He said, I'm going to go to Jerusalem. I'm going to go and I'm going to get arrested and I'm going to get tried and I'm going to die and then 3 days later I'm going to rise from the dead. And he hadn't told them that just once. He told them that over and over, right? Well, everything he's been telling them, right, just played out.
And they've left the man that they claim to love so much flapping in the wind.
Yeah. And they watch it all unfold in front of their eyes, and what do? They run.
They run like scared children.
They should have seen what Jesus just told us about this.
I,
And they run. It's a faith.
I think too that, sometimes when you're close to somebody and they're gonna go through something, your inclination, I think, is to try to save them, and you can't. It's like an addict. When you see somebody who is going through an addiction crisis and they're gonna take that next hit, and you wanna prevent it as much as you can, but you can't. And I think there's a part of that there where, I think there was a reality where it began to click what he'd been telling them, and there wasn't anything that they could do to stop it.
Couldn't do anything. So maybe they felt powerless in what was going on. What does this part right here, even though it sounds funny, what does it really say about that guy right there? Go ahead, Brian.
He was wearing his clothes and he tried to grab him. And he slipped out of it and tried to run away. Like,
Yeah.
when people grab the back of the book bag and he just dropped the book bag and go away.
So, obviously, we see what happened then. Obviously, they grabbed him and he slipped out, right? But what's it tell us about that guy that he slipped out? Tegan, what do you want to say?
He was so scared for his own life that he didn't care whether or not he was clothed or not. And he was so scared that he didn't have enough faith to throw his own lot in Jesus's that he ran away naked and afraid.
He was so afraid and so scared, he didn't care that he was running off naked. Didn't care about whether he was naked or not. He just slipped out and ran. I think that tells us an awful lot about that guy and his willingness to do that. What was their greatest failure in this, guys? What do you think? What was their greatest failure, in your opinion? Tegan?
Not believing him when he said that it was all going to happen.
Maybe not
But
believing
So
Christ.
truly their greatest failure was not believing Mary and the other women when they came back and told them that Jesus was gone.
Well, that would be later, but right now in this situation, what do you think was their greatest failure?
They abandoned him.
They abandoned it. So we got two ideas going on here. Miss Amber says their abandonment. Tegan says that their faith was too weak. Anyone else got an idea? What do you think was their greatest failure? Anyone? So whether it was their willingness to abandon them or the fact that they just couldn't trust Jesus enough, here's the question again, last question that I asked for Judas too. Do you think they could be forgiven? And why? They all just abandoned Jesus. think they could be forgiven? And why? Steve?
I think they could be forgiven because God knows He knows our human hearts. He knows the human condition. He knows that we run when we're scared and that we're terrified of what we don't understand. And so that he understands why those men would run away and abandoning his son because he knew it was going to happen in the first place.
So Jesus knows where our hearts are, and he knows what our weak places are. So you say, yes, we could be forgiven because Jesus knows us. Who do you think would be harder for the whole group to forgive? Or what do you think would be harder for the whole group to forgive? Their choosing to abandon Jesus, or Judas betraying him? Deacon?
It would be harder for them to forgive themselves for abandoning Jesus to the Roman guards because he is their teacher. He's the one that they claim to love and care about so very, very much. And yet when push comes to shove and they've been called to task to either stand by him or abandon him, they choose to abandon him. And I know from experience, having to do that once, it was incredibly hard. And having to abandon someone that you love and care about so very, very much because you don't know what to do. It's incredibly hard to forgive yourself for something that you feel like you could have done better. You should have stayed by them. You should have done this. You should have done that.
So you feel like it could have been more difficult for them to forgive themselves because they know that they maybe could have done more. Anyone have a different opinion? I don't know about you guys. I kind of feel like it would have been more difficult for them to forgive Judas. But here's the thing, though. Which one was the worst sin?
Neither.
Yeah, neither. Sin is sin, right? Neither was the worst sin. They're both sin, right?
They could have even been angry or upset with the people that were arresting Jesus because they weren't being gentle. You know, they had a mob that was after them, and so there could have been some attitude there.
We got to get moving because it's 8 o'clock right now. So let's go through this one here and let me get us wrapped up here. So Luke 22, 59 through 60, we've talked about this a lot during Holy Week, or during Lent now. About an hour later, someone else insisted, "This must be one of them, because he is a Galilean too." That sound familiar? But Peter said, "Man, I don't know what you're talking about." And immediately, while he was still speaking, the rooster crowed. So in what way do you think Peter was weak? Tegan?
He was scared.
He was afraid.
He was very much human, and he was scared that he saw Jesus being pulled through being forced to pull that cross through the streets, and he was scared that he too would be put on the cross.
Now, he wasn't at the cross carrying part yet, but he still was watching Jesus go through an awful lot, though, wasn't he? He was there in the courtyard, and Jesus was probably in that same courtyard going through that interrogation and the mockery and going through just all kinds of stuff. So yeah, definitely. Anyone else? What do you think Peter's weakness was? What do you think? Yeah. Denying that he knew Jesus. Unwilling to fess up and stand up for Jesus there. Yeah. So what's his greatest failure? Keegan.
His greatest failure is that he didn't trust enough that everything would be okay, everything would be all right, and everything that Jesus told them that would come to pass would pass, and that he would in fact raise from the dead after 3 days, and everything would be okay.
So another matter of trust again, maybe. Anyone else? What do you think? Peter's greatest failure?
He believed in his own strength, not the strength.
He was believing more in his own strength than in the strength of God. Apparently, his strength wasn't real strengthy.
The desertion of a friend.
Yeah. The question again, do you think Peter could be forgiven? This is the only one that we really kind of know the answer to, sort of, isn't it? Do you think Peter could be forgiven? Why? Because he was. Right? Yeah, because he was. We see the whole forgiveness thing unfold, don't we? Now again, which is worse sin? Peter's sin, the sin of the whole disciples collectively, or Judas's? And which one's worse?
They are all equal.
They're all sin, right? They're all equal. They're all the same, right? And Jesus proves through Peter that it can be forgiven. And he goes to the lengths. Jesus purposefully steps out to give the forgiveness to Peter because of what he did. And Jesus watched it happen. And you guys remember last week when we talked about that, the one look, those of you who were here, how Jesus just looked at him across the court and you got that one look and you just knew what was going on there. So let me ask you the same questions that we've just been talking about on these guys, okay? You ready? These are not questions I expect for you to answer here out loud, but I would like you to think about them and maybe answer them for yourself. In what ways do you think you've been weak? In what ways do you think that you have been weak? What is your greatest failure for Jesus? I don't want you to answer out loud because this is for you, not for public address. What is your greatest failure? And then finally, do you think you could be forgiven? Now, we kind of have answered that last question already, but here's the deal on that last question. I don't know what you've done that is your failure. And I don't know where you've been weak, and I don't know what your greatest failure has been. You probably do know that, though. And a lot of times, as believers, or people who were believers, or have never been believers, sometimes we look at ourselves and we look at what we've done, and we think to ourselves, that's not forgivable. I can never be forgiven. Or maybe, worse, we think I could never forgive myself, to which I say, how dare you? How dare you take that opinion? Do you think that you are greater than God? If God is willing to forgive you, then why should you hold a harder grudge against yourself than God does? God will forgive you, and all you have to do is ask. When he, as you reminded us earlier, asked with sincerity, right? Please forgive me, and forgiveness is available. And there is no reason for us to further think, I am not forgiven and I am not forgivable. God gives forgiveness, and for us to believe ourselves unforgivable, that is a lie from the devil. For us to think that we could never be strong enough, or we could never get past those weaknesses, again, it's a lie from the devil. We can become stronger. You look at Peter's example, and he will receive forgiveness, but not only did Peter receive forgiveness, Christ entrusted Jesus with the leadership of the disciples in the church as he left, and he handed that into Peter's hands. And Peter was a hot-headed guy with all kinds of emotions that controlled his reactions, but he became a strong spiritual leader. And it's not about having to be able to lift 500 pounds today. It's about going along the journey and growing stronger each day. And knowing I don't have to be a 98-pound athlete. I can grow in my strength. I can learn to get past my weaknesses, and Jesus can help me get past that because he will forgive me and show me how to be stronger. That, in the end, is really what Easter is about, because Jesus went and suffered and died, and he rose the 3 days later. In the death and the shedding of his blood, he covers sin, but in his resurrection, he becomes victorious over death. And that is how we know that we can be forgiven. We can become strong in him. And we can have that eternal life and be close to him, not just today, but of course for eternity. All right, let's say a word of prayer. I'm going too long, so please forgive me. Father, thanks for our time together tonight. Just pray that you will help us to keep in mind the rest of this week what this season is really all about. And Father, it's about the great gift you gave us all. And we, like the disciples, as we've seen in these verses, have been weak. We've done goofy, stupid, and crazy things sometimes that were just completely wrong. And we failed you, we failed ourselves and our friends and our family. But Lord, you can forgive us and bring us back to you because, you know, we can get past those weaknesses because you can bring us strength and grow us in you, Father. So help us to do those things. Help us to realize that we can bring it to you and receive that forgiveness. We thank you for all that you do. Just pray that you'll be with everyone, help them to have a great rest of the spring break and then a strong return back for this last part of the school year, Father. We thank you for all of it, and we ask you in your name. Amen.
Amen.